Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's that time of week again, everybody's favorite segment, the Power Rankings. Before I jump in, I just want to say thank you to everyone that subscribed and helped to join this giveaway and make it a big possibility. 1,000 subscribers earlier this week, shortly after last week's Power Rankings. Such an amazing feat. I've been working so long for it, and I'm just happy to have made it and that you guys were all here for a part of it. We're going to jump into it. We got 30 teams to go over. Quickly talk about how they did this week and kind of where I'm seeing on everything before we do. If you are new subscribers, we're going for 1,500 now. It's just going to keep going, so do that. Otherwise, we're just going to jump in. Number 30. In this bottom row, I'm just going to say it now, was pretty interesting compared to last week. A lot of winning weeks for the bottom row, including this team who has won back-to-back series, 2-1 against Detroit and then 2-1 against the Mets this week. If you look at their one game last week against Philadelphia too, they won that one. So what's that, like 5-2 in their past 7? Pretty good, but Miami, long way to go, and a lot of teams ahead of them that I still think, of course, are better than them in that overall head-to-head match. But they're starting to make an argument. Maybe the 30 this year isn't as bad as we have seen in prior years. Next up, number 29. I thought about possibly moving them up, and then they got swept over the weekend by the Giants, their division rival, probably the team that's going to end up right ahead of them in the division. So to get swept by them, it's going to hurt their chances to start moving up this power rankings. You got to start to compete in your division at one point or another to move up, and they didn't. They did sweep San Diego, so contrary to what I just said, they did sweep them earlier in the week. Had a 7-game win streak going on at Colorado. They had been bottom. They got in that 7-game win streak. They're 29. But they got to play some of these teams, and I think they play number 28 this coming week. I'm almost certain. Maybe it's another month, but Chicago White Sox. I know the White Sox are playing the Jays next, so maybe it's a couple of weeks still before these two teams match up. But the White Sox, 2-1 against Washington. They've been pretty consistent. I'd say around 500 at least for a couple of weeks. Getting destroyed, though, this weekend by the Yankees. They're not really going to make their way out of the bottom row anytime soon. I don't think this season we're not going to really see them. I think once we start to get to the end of the bottom row, the rest of these teams are pretty much at least going to be in the wild card hunt most of the way. But the White Sox, to me, clearly the last place team in their division. So they got a long way to go. Number 27, we got the LA Angels. 500 week for them. They went 1-2 against St. Louis. And then they beat their rivals, Texas Rangers, 2-1, including the rubber match today. They're doing all right since Trent went down. They haven't really completely embarrassed themselves as a team as a whole. They still have some pretty good parts that we will probably see them trading around the trade deadline, maybe bolster their roster for the upcoming years. We don't really expect to see them make it too much farther in this kind of same story as I was talking about with these other teams. The rest of the teams are going to be in the competition without Trout, without anything really to build momentum on. Angels don't seem to be getting it. I guess at this point, their one famed glory is that they have now caught back up to the Oakland A's. 0-4 against Houston, 0-3 against Kansas City, and 0-7 week, and now have lost 8 in a row. The A's, maybe they're back. We might be back to the team. I might have been wrong. I might have got ahead of myself that this team is starting to make some changes, but I guess it was expected. Like, the team overall on a roster scale isn't really matching up with the rest of the MLB, right? They have young guys, but some of these young guys aren't really performing what they would expect. They got maybe a couple of guys in their bullpen and their rotation that are being thrown around as possible trades, but a lot of them are locked up for a couple of years too. So it's going to be interesting what the A's do. We know they have a bridge being built now before they move to Vegas, but right now it's interesting. These two teams battling for the bottom. And number 25, the winner of this week in the bottom row, 2-1 against the Dodgers, 2-1 against Boston. So they've now won a few series in a row here, and they're starting to maybe make an argument that if they get hot enough, we're going to see them start to climb, because we're going to start talking about this next row. It's a lot of teams that were looking okay early and then are starting to really slide, and it's starting to be the kind of the opposite. We're starting to meet the opposite situation here, where some teams in the bottom row, like I said, they were on a winning week, so fairly interesting. Almost all these teams except the A's did have a winning week, but we're going to get into the next row, and it's a lot of teams that are struggling, and maybe they're going to fall to the bottom row. So super interesting. This 24-25 spot has been tough to kind of sort out who is going to get this last spot in the bottom row. Cardinals working their way up. They were farther, and I'm starting to like what I'm seeing. They're starting to maybe put some stuff together. Unlike this team, seems to be one of the biggest struggles for them. They had 4 games, a home and home against Philly earlier in the week, went 1-3 there, and then they lose the series to Miami over the weekend. A couple weeks ago, I started to have a little bit of praise for the Mets, but I know they're 3-7 in their last 10, and they're kind of back to where they were expected and how they've been performing for the majority of the time last year and this year. So the couple of weeks where they started to look like maybe they're turning around, maybe that's just a fluke. And that's the way I'm kind of building it right now. And that's why I have them number 24. Number 23, and this is part of the reason why I took a little bit going here. The Dodgers and Cincy finishing out their game. They went to extras. Cincy fell again. After winning the leadoff game against the Dodgers, they lost 3 straight for a 1-3 series there. And they lose to Arizona. So going up against the National League West did not go well for Cincinnati. However, going somehow 2-5, and they moved up 2 spots on the board. Kind of crazy, but a lot of it had to do with Oakland just completely crashing. And I'm not so sure that the Mets are going to be any better than Cincy. The one thing to keep an eye on, if Cincy continues to struggle, they might not fall back to the bottom row, but St. Louis, I've been saying, they are on the climb. Number 22, not too far ahead of these teams whatsoever. 1-2 against the Dodgers, so they're not going to catch the top of this division. I think that's pretty clear. But to go 3-0 over the weekend against the Rockies, they've defined that they are not the worst team in this division. I think we all knew that, so they just made a statement on that. Beat Cincinnati last week. I think they beat the Mets. So I think this is a pretty secure spot for San Francisco. If anything, they've had trouble scoring runs this year, but if they can start sorting that out, their pitching's been pretty good and holding them in lots of close games. They have a chance. They're one of the teams that I was talking about, teams that are trending down. They're not really trending down. They're more treading water with a potential to move forward. Number 21, a team that I think they stay in the exact same spot as last week. Not too much going for them this week because they only had 5 games, so that's back-to-back week now for the Jays without having 5 games. Both weeks going 2-3. They went 1-1 against Baltimore. Could have potentially beat Baltimore both games, but absolutely blew a game in the bottom of the 9th against Baltimore with Rutschman hitting that walk-off. And then they lose to their division rival, Tampa, 2-1 here. And if you watched it, the Jays have not been good. However, this week, all the losses were only 1-run losses. Something to hold true, but they also won most of their games by 1 run. They're keeping games close. Their pitching has been there. The bats have not. And if they don't turn that around, this is a team that very well could finish last in this division. I don't think anyone predicted that at the beginning of the season, but right now that's what it's looking like. 21, can they go much lower? I don't think they have the talent to go much lower, but I've been eating my words on the Jays all season. Number 20, one of the teams that had a struggling week and have now lost 5 in a row. We got Washington, 1-2 against the White Sox, so starting to kind of maybe go back to their ways. They are one of those teams trending down. I don't think they moved spots because they had been trending up for a couple of weeks, so it's kind of like a big slap stop for Washington. Then they get swept over the weekend against the Philadelphia Phillies. Phillies really showing why they're so dominant. And Washington, they got a ways to go. Can they match up against Miami? I think so. But maybe it's time to bring those teams a little closer together. Number 19, we saw Paul Skeens make his debut this week, pitching twice. And what was it, the second game? He had 7 straight strikeouts to start the game. 3-1 against the Cubs over the weekend. So maybe there's some big momentum here. Pittsburgh trying to right the ship, bringing up a big call-up. Maybe the fact that he's going to be pitching every 5 days is going to make a massive difference. They did go 1-2 against Milwaukee, so they had a week where they played both of the top teams in their division, and a winning week overall, so they got to be pretty excited at that. I don't know what their schedule is. They're 6 games back right now in the division. They're going to have to start chipping away to get back in that race. I think they're very capable of doing it and borderline going on to the third row. Number 18, a team that just seems to be underperforming this year, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it turn around real soon. They're kind of flirting with it. 2-1 against Cincinnati, 1-2 against Detroit. It's been a 500 week. 500 baseballs is good enough to stay around in the conversation, especially in the National League wild card right now. And that's all they really need to do. We don't really think that Arizona is going to be able to go on such a streak where they're going to be able to catch the Dodgers, nor do we really think that they can compete with them on a regular basis. But Arizona, they're playoff caliber. We saw it last year, World Series finalists. Sure, maybe they shouldn't have been there against all the grand scheme of things, but the truth is they were there. They have the players that with the experience to be able to do such a thing again. They have a rotation that is very playoff strong, so do not count this team out. I would think they don't fall too much lower than this. Of course, I eat my words very often on these power rankings. Number 17, next up, Texas. And I guess this is halfway through, and it's a good time to mention that if you were a fan, you knew that we were doing a giveaway. Was going to do it at the Blue Jays, but I simply forgot. So we're going to do it at the World Series Champions. If you're a subscriber, write a comment below. Let me know using this word, the word splash, that word somewhere in the sentence. I don't care where, but use it. And let me know what your favorite part of the season has been so far. Use that word, drop a comment, be a subscriber, and I will enter you to do a draw for a giveaway. There won't be too much people, I don't think, that enter. So make sure you do, and you have a good chance. Going to be giving away a hat for the 1,000 subs, so thank you again if you are here. Texas, 17, 1-2 against Cleveland, 1-2 against the Angels. So again, another losing week for the Rangers. And I can't stop them from falling just because they keep losing, and teams that are behind them are starting to get stronger. And they're definitely really scary for me as a team that's going to be able to compete and stay in this division fight. We got two teams now. We're going to get to Houston in a second, but that have shown that they are playoff ready, whereas Texas, sure, they've won the World Series, but they're not the same team they were at that moment. And if they don't find a way to keep this 500, it's been 500, they got to at least keep that going to stay in the fight long enough. Next up, you got the San Diego Padres, 0-3 against Colorado and 1-0 against Atlanta. Only one game this weekend so far, of course. Sunday nighter tonight, San Diego, Atlanta playing. Then they have a double header tomorrow, Monday, so they're going to make up 4 games, but not a lot to go off of other than getting swept by Colorado this week and somehow coming back and beating the Braves. I don't get it, but San Diego seems to be that team that I just don't figure out ever, and I'm going to put them right in the middle because that seems to be right where they are, 500 team, right on the border of a wild card spot right now, so I think 16 makes a lot of sense. Next up, Detroit, 1-2 against Miami, and then we had a winning series against Arizona. Detroit's one of those teams too that I think they're much better than they have been in the past couple seasons. I think Detroit last year was mostly in this bottom row. This might be the highest we've had them in a number of years, so that at least is saying something. They are winning series against tough teams. Like Arizona's not too far out. They got to give them a lot of credit for winning that series, but to lose a series like they did against Miami, that's a playoff team needs to win those. That's where you're going to make up the difference in your games. The American League Central is probably the most competitive because this is the 4th lowest team in that division. That's at 15. Normally, we're talking about the American League East in that scenario. Sure, we haven't hit the 4th bottom team in that yet, but we're just about to at number 14. I do got Boston, 1-3 against Tampa, 1-2 against St. Louis. And they have struggled a bit as of late. They're falling back down to basically 500. Losing the series to Tampa makes me start to appreciate that I did have them predicted last. They probably might end up back there if the Jays can figure their stuff out. They haven't played the Jays yet. They're starting to play some more tougher games, Boston is. This upcoming week is going to really tell me what kind of team this is. Are they going to bounce back? They're playing Tampa Bay again. They're playing the Milwaukee Brewers, both teams I have ahead of them now. And if they're going to stay around and in this conversation, we got a thick middle here, and you could easily start falling down. Just ask the Blue Jays about what happened. Number 13, I do have the Tampa Bay Rays working their way up, 3-1 against Boston, 2-1 against the Jays, 5-2 in the series division against the 2 teams now that they have passed. Tampa, they've been one of the hotter teams over the past 4 weeks, I would say. After a struggling time, I had them in a couple rows down. They're starting to figure it out. The runs are getting in there, and they're fighting, and they're winning those close games. So right now, don't have a whole lot to say. I haven't watched them like as closely as some other teams, so just keep that in mind. Number 12. I think I moved these guys up the most this week. They might have even been down in this row. I can't exactly remember where I had them, but I don't think it's unjustified. This team has probably, I think it's won 5 series in a row. Something like that. They had one of the most atrocious Aprils in their history. Maybe not in their history, but at least in the past decade. And the Astros are starting to figure it out, and they're in a division where they had the time to be able to figure it out. And I think when this team's fully healthy and starting to get rolling, they got what it takes to be a playoff team already. We already know that. So just the fact that them starting to pick up some games, would be worried to face Houston right now. They are probably one of the stronger teams going. Of course, we saw Blanco get that 10-game suspension this week. There's always going to be the debate, are the Astros kind of cheaters? We kind of got to think about that. But right now, they're proving it to me, and I'm already jumping back on board early. I want to be one of the early ones. Number 11, I got the Minnesota Twins, and for me, these guys are super interesting. 0-3 against the Yankees, and then 0-3 against Cleveland. So a team that's been like the most streaky, it feels like, this season. They're now on another 6-game losing streak this week, not winning a single game. I had moved them up top of the division. Now they're in third in this whole conversation. I think Cleveland did a good job of really showing us it's not the Twins division anymore, and I'm sold. Might have taken me a while. I've been told all season long that I've been lowering Cleveland, but I think this week we saw what I needed to see. Next up, I do have the Seattle Mariners. They went 2-1 against Kansas City. That was a really great series. I watched it closely. And then 1-2 against Baltimore over this weekend. So a 500 week against two teams that do have a higher than them. So that is pretty good. You got to be pretty happy with that. On top of that, Seattle has been one of the hotter teams over the past month, picking up a lot of wins along the way. They haven't been able to tear away from their division, and that's not going to happen if you're putting them 500 weeks, but they do have another tough week ahead of them. And if they can come out of this week with a winning record, I think that'll speak volumes for what kind of a team we're going to see in the Mariners and potentially American League West champions. They got the Yankees, they got the Washington Nationals. So if they can steal 2 from the Yankees, that would be massive for this team, and I went excited to see how that goes. Number 9, one of the biggest fallers in the top 10 this week. 1-2 against Atlanta, 1-3 against Pittsburgh. Maybe a little bit of coming back to earth. I had them number 6, I think, for a couple of weeks. They never broke the top 5. I don't think they ever came close to that. But holding on to 6 is quite an accomplishment for a Cubs team that coming into the season, I didn't expect to be that high. Sure, they've had a little bit of struggles now, and now they're falling a couple of games back from the Brewers. But they're in the playoff hunt, and I think that speaks a lot. They got to be careful, though. That big series loss to Pittsburgh, it hurts. It's 1 week, it's one series. I know they're going to play a lot more. Pittsburgh has at least struggled for a lot longer, hence why they're all the way down there. A lot of room, space between them, but if the Cubs take their foot off the gas, they could find themselves in trouble because they will be falling even farther behind Milwaukee. 2-1 against Pittsburgh, 1-2 against Houston. 500 week, same kind of story I was talking about with Seattle. They're not going on the kind of streak that you need to pull away from other teams in the division. They've now caught up to the Cubs, passed them on my board, but now it's time to put your pedal to the metal. Milwaukee's got to try and start to break into this top row. When you're in the top row, you're starting to pull away, especially in division races. So Milwaukee, it's all right week, 500 week. We aren't going to hold too much against them, but losing to Houston, not going to hold too much against them because I do think Houston is the most rising star on the board. But Milwaukee, they have to find some wins this week. I want to see them have a winning week, or they're going to kind of be struggling because we got some hot teams right behind them. Next up, number 7, potentially the highest ranking this team has ever seen on this board, having been in the bottom row for countless years. 1-2 against Seattle. A big matchup. Seattle and Kansas City were right beside each other. Didn't put a whole lot of weight into that series. Seattle was at home. When you're at home in a 3-game series, I expect you to win 2 out of 3 if you're matched up evenly. So the fact there, I didn't hold too much weight in that specific setup. And at the same time, Kansas City rebounded massively, sweeping a struggling team. And that's what I like to see from playoff competitive teams. Rebounding and dominating teams that are below you by a significant margin. And Kansas City did that. I'm really excited with how their starting pitching has been. And for that, I do have them a couple of spots up on the Mariners just in case that stands out. Number 6, guys, have been told all season long, and I think this week was the reason I'm starting to maybe believe, but at the same time, do not get too excited because every time I tend to do something like this, I finally cave. That's when the regression or the turnaround seems to happen. But the 3-0 series sweep against the Minnesota Twins was enough for me to be like, okay, maybe I didn't give them enough credit for this hot, amazing start they had. They just dominated their number 1 competition. in my eyes in the division, but now it's starting to look like Kansas City might be that. We're looking forward to when they first play off against each other. And then they beat Texas 2-1 early in the week. A team that's kind of down. World Series chance, we talk about it all the time, but they're kind of down. And Cleveland took advantage and won that series. So that's the kind of thing I like to see, and that's the kind of thing I like to promote on this board. And for now, I have to give it to Cleveland. They're not the top 5. I think the top 5 overall is like solid. I think it's pretty hard to argue anyone else in the top 5. So number 6 in that regard is a sick spot for them to be. Number 5, this took a lot. Number 5 is going to be a little jumbled, and people might disagree, but I looked back a couple of weeks, kind of got how am I feeling about these teams, and number 5 came up with the Atlanta Braves. I think this is going to be the season when we see the most different teams in number 1. It just feels like it, and this is the most competitive top 5 has ever been. It feels like. So Atlanta this week 2-1 against the Cubs, 0-1 against the Padres so far. So like it's not like they had a bad week. They beat a team that was technically number 6, but at the same time I have them drop. So does that weigh as much? Atlanta's like they're just doesn't seem to have the same consistency that the rest of these other 4 teams have. I'm not gonna crap on them because they're above 600, right? It's not too much going against them, but just little things like that stand out to me. Acuna not carrying the team like we have seen in the past, not just being absolutely monster like we see with Ohtani, like we see with some of these other guys on the top. And so that starts to have me worried. Again, top 5 concrete, like the difference here is way bigger than 6 and 7 kind of. So we'll get into that. Number 4, arguably could be even higher. These guys have won 7 in a row, 3-0 against Minnesota, 3-0 against the White Sox. They've been one of the most consistent teams in terms of winning, it seems like, this season. They haven't had very much losing streaks, at least streaks that I can remember. Jays had a chance to sweep them. They didn't get it. They go on win streaks to start the year. They swept the Astros 4-0 and won even more. And like, so it's definitely there. The winning ways of the Yankees is there. The only thing that's kind of holding me back from them is that these guys played recently, and I had to give them the credit to be number 3. Otherwise, that's pretty much the main difference right now between these two is just that one series. Mind you, Baltimore is starting to worry me slightly. 2-1 against Seattle, win the series. 1-1 against Toronto. Could have easily been 0-2, so it was a 5-game week for the Orioles. Again, we see a little bit of the problems in the bullpen, especially against the Toronto series. And even, it's just a little bit concerned for me. Enough for me to not be able to put them in back-to-back rank number 1. I think that's fair. I do have those concerns. I think for me, the other 2 teams have been at least consistent through and through. Maybe I'm missing something, but that seems to be the case. And that brings me to number 2. I have a different team in my hand. I'm contemplating if I should put it up because I do this beforehand. I do sort it out, but now I'm starting to lean a different way. But I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to stick with what I did. 2-1 against San Francisco. 1-3 against Cincinnati. I do have the Dodgers as number 2. And what can I say about the Dodgers other than they continue to win too? They have them like an all-star team kind of lineup through and through. And their pitching's starting to come around, definitely with Walker Buehler getting back in that rotation. So arguably could be number 1 in my books. I'm having a lot of trouble, and I wasn't ready to do this. I wasn't going to put these guys number 1 because I wasn't satisfied. I've talked about it in the rankings a little bit. I wasn't satisfied because they have not played the level of competition as other teams. But guys, these guys are putting up 10 runs consistently against these weak teams, and their offense is just absolutely dominate. Another amazing week for the Phillies, 6-1, sweeping the Washington Nationals over the weekend, and then the 3-1 against the Mets. So just overall dumping on their division. I didn't want to pass Atlanta until they saw each other, but it just to me seems like one team is just absolutely on fire. Number 1, it's tough, but like I said earlier, this top 5 might be the most jumbled top 5 I've had in a very long time. I can't remember a power rankings where it was this much of a debate between top 5. Usually it's top 2, maybe debatable, top 3, but for the top 5, this is amazing season so far. It's just goes to show what this season has been like. Absolutely craziness all throughout this. Even the bottom row, some teams on here are super competitive. This is not going to be, doesn't feel like it's going to be one of those seasons where the bottom row is just absolutely terrible. We know they are bad, but they're not going to be Oakland A's last few seasons, Baltimore Orioles last few seasons when they were all bad. Like, it's not going to be like that, I don't think. These teams at least can fight any of these middling teams at least very well. So keep in mind, let me know what you guys think. This was absolutely awesome to do, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of craziness about who's number one. I think I'm crazy. Like, they haven't been tested super much, but I think they deserve it at this point. I think they deserve it. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. Peace out.